Welcome to the February 2024 meetup of the Higher Education Power BI User Group. I am, as usual, your host, Pete Benbow at Davidson College in North Carolina. With us today, we've got Doug Purnell from Elon University, who will be talking to us about Microsoft Fabric. Really excited about that. I'll have a little bit more as we get closer to his talk. As usual, to anyone who is new to the group, I just want to restate our mission at the user group is to train, educate, and connect data professionals who work with Microsoft Power BI at colleges and universities. And as Doug is going to illustrate for us later in this meeting, that really should probably be including Fabric before long, because Microsoft Power BI is becoming really if you'll forgive the pun, woven into the fabric of fabric, I guess. So really excited about the future of Power BI and Microsoft Fabric. So I usually start these meetings with a quick update of where we are in Power BI. The latest version of Power BI Desktop is February 2024. You can download the latest version by going to the link in the upper right corner of this slide. The February 2024 version has got some really cool new features. In particular, we've got visual calculations, which is a new way of adding calculations to a Power BI visual that are scoped to just that visual. And the idea behind it from Microsoft was simplifying the experience of creating measures and calculations in a Power BI report. I've got a really good blog post that I'm going to send around to everyone after the meeting wraps up that shows you a bit more about how visual calculations work and why they could be useful. So you should definitely research that. Visual calculations seem like a great feature. Especially for people who don't want to deal with all of the complexity of complex semantic modeling inside of Power BI. And I certainly understand that that can be a very technical topic. Visual calculations is supposed to simplify that. Another great feature is the support for Tyndall, which is a new language that basically represents the metadata behind your Power BI data models. For those who aren't familiar, Power BI data models are actually stored in a format called TMSL, TMSL, which is basically a derivative of JSON or JavaScript object notation. And your Power BI data model is just a giant monolithic file of all this code. But this new Tyndall format actually breaks down all of that metadata into separate files and in a much more readable format. It was pioneered by a guy named Matthias Tierbach, who is based out of Europe, and he's a very well-known sort of innovator in Power BI. And Tyndall is kind of his baby, and Microsoft loved his innovation so much that they have now provided official support for it. It is now part of Power BI Desktop. It's a pretty technical thing, but if you're one of those Power BI developers and administrators out there who likes to be able to look at the actual DNA of your Power BI solutions, the new Tyndall support is a really great advancement in Power BI. So I'm going to send out some blog posts, like I said, about these features and more. A lot of exciting things happening in Power BI just in the last couple of months. So I can't summarize it all right now, so I'll send out some posts and you all can read that on your own time. I don't want to take any time away from Doug and his excellent presentation that we're about to see. I also typically talk about Power BI Report Server. The latest version of Power BI Report Server is January 2024, and the new features I have summarized as not much. Report Server is really kind of just hanging on. Like, you know, they get a couple of small updates a year. Usually there's 3 updates a year, every 4 months, and they tend to be pretty small updates. My perception is that Power BI Report Server continues to fall farther and farther behind the Power BI Cloud. So, you know, when they get a significant update, I'll certainly let you know about it. But most of the updates these days are around like formatting changes and things like that. They're not very significant. So a couple of quick announcements. First of all, I want to congratulate the group. We have reached over 400 members since we started up in September, I think, of last year. In fact, I think right before this meeting started, we hit 450. So nice round number. Congrats. I think that's great. Again, my typical appeal to please contact me if you would like to volunteer to speak. I'd like to get people in here. We had someone on the Slack channel recently ask about using Copilot in Power BI, which is Copilot is Microsoft's generative AI tool, and they are finding ways to actually bring that into the Power BI experience. As a matter of fact, there's a blog post that came out a couple of days ago where if you're using Microsoft Fabric and Copilot, you can use that Copilot feature to automatically generate descriptions for your Power BI measures and put those into your data model, which is a great feature. It's powered by that generative AI. And so someone had a question about Copilot, and I said, "Hey, I haven't had any experience with it. Why don't you go out and research it, and then come back to us with a proposal for a presentation to the user group?" So if there's something out there that you would like someone to present on, or you don't know much about, and you might want to research and then present on it yourself, I encourage you, please, contact me. Let me know what you're interested in, and let's try to put that together. We've got no shortage of ideas. We just have a shortage of time in which to present them, and I'd love to get more people involved in this. So speaking of upcoming meetings, our next meeting is March 20th, and we're going to be joined by Vijay Hemantha, who is the founder and CEO of TrueViz. He's going to be talking to us about Power Ops. Vijay is a person that I met through my connections in the Power BI community, and I've actually been testing the Power Ops platform for him and his company. And I was really impressed by it. And I said, "Vijay, you got to come on here and demo this tool for our user group." So he's going to be joining us next month. He's going to give us a walkthrough of Power Ops. It has both a desktop version and it has a cloud-based SaaS version, software as a service. So he's going to show us some of those tools and how Power BI developers can use Power Ops to monitor best practices, track changes to your reports, and look at the different ways that you're using Power BI. So really excited to have Vijay joining us next month. After the meeting, look out for an email from meetup.com. It's going to contain blog posts that I will provide with the February 2024 feature summary and other relevant content. As always, it'll contain a link to our YouTube channel, which will have recordings of all of our previous meetings, a link to our Slack workspace, and links to some forms where you can A, submit an idea for a topic or speaker, or B, volunteer to speak at an upcoming meeting. And then also I will include a link to RSVP for our March 20th meeting. So that's my intro. Now it's presentation time. I'm going to ask everyone to please put your questions in the chat window. And as I see those questions come in, I will either present them to Doug, or I will wait until Doug is done talking, and then we'll go through those one at a time. So it's my pleasure to reintroduce Doug Purnell, database architect at Elon University. Doug actually spoke at one of our first meetings where he talked about Elon's journey into the world of Power BI. And today, Doug is going to be talking to us about Microsoft Fabric. Fabric is basically it's an analytics platform to which Power BI now belongs. Doug will probably do a better job articulating that relationship in a moment, but Fabric is now basically a larger ecosystem to which Power BI belongs. There are a lot of additional features that Power BI can take advantage of in Fabric. And, Davidson, we're about to actually start using Fabric on March 1st. Jeff Cook, who is co-organizer of the user group, has also indicated that University of Miami is going to be joining the Fabric cult pretty soon, and it looks like Elon's on their way as well. So Doug's going to tell us all about Fabric. It'll probably be fairly technical at some points, but we're going to try and illustrate kind of what all of this means for Power BI developers, whether you're in central IT or institutional research and effectiveness. Wherever you are in your organization, I think that Fabric is going to be very beneficial for you. So I'm going to stop sharing and let Doug take it away.
Right. Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Jeff, for hosting. I appreciate it, and I appreciate the invite. Let me get this sharing. Okay. So great. Well, thanks, everybody. So my goal today is to introduce you to Fabric, like Ben said, in the ecosystem, and try to tie it to the Power BI developers in the room. as well. So sort of where this sort of came from was Microsoft's platform. Really like 8 months ago, you had different systems all throughout the Azure ecosystem. Our own journey, we're still using Synapse Data Warehouse and Azure Databricks for some of our stuff. So we went through this journey as well. And that's why we're looking at Fabric, was just because of all the bits and pieces you had to sort of work together to make this work. One of the Microsoft presentations where I got some of these slides from is, a lot of us can relate to this, is, there's so much integration between the different systems that we have, and there's got to be a better way. And that's where the idea of Fabric came from. All of these tools that you see in front of you are all part of the Fabric ecosystem. Power BI is the main sort of character where this sort of merged into. And you'll notice as we get to the screenshots later on that it's almost like they took Fabric and just sort of integrated into the Power BI screens. And some of you may already see some of this as you go into Power BI Cloud today. And we'll dive into each one of these tools, but each one of these tools allows you to manipulate your data, present your data, alert off of your data, and it's all built off of this one lake. And we'll get into that in a little bit. But the reason this Fabric is so important is just because it's a single sort of system. Everything's integrated, everything works together. It's very easy to spin up. There's source control built in. There's a data hub, governance. It's all sort of baked in. The product is generally available as of today, or as of a few months ago, and they're every month or so they're releasing updates and they're improving on it. But it's a viable product for some companies today. So the reason this works so well is the idea of one lake. All of these systems work off of the same piece of data. In the Synapse world, if any of you are using Synapse, this wasn't the case. You had different databases, different data sets for each workspace, where they've eliminated that. So all of these systems are working off the same exact data. And data is an interesting concept now, because for those of you that grew up in the data warehouse world, you had dimension tables and fact tables, and you had to build ETL scripts and get all these relational databases together. And that's sort of, it's changing right now. It's now turning into files, and we'll go into that more. And there's actually a relational engine on top of the files now. So it's a different way of looking at data. And like I said, all of your data lives in the lake, and all of these systems across the top can each reference the same data point. And that's the key point here, is once you build out your finance data mart, or your date dimension, or your course dimension, everyone can benefit from it. The part that they're still working on is the one security model. There are some bits and pieces with security today that you can manage the workspaces and who can create things, but there's going to be more coming on this. This is currently in development. And so we'll have to wait to see how they implement this. So Ben mentioned this earlier, software as a service, and Fabric is a software as a service. And it's important because you literally click a button to turn it on. You don't have to go into the Azure portal and configure anything with it beyond the system. Everyone who has a tenant already has one lake. Everyone, once you turn on Fabric, it's available. It's a nice system. It's point and click, and it works in the web browser. You don't have to download any software except for a few little pieces that I'll show you. So it's a nice implementation. So one lake. This is the foundation of Fabric, and ultimately what leads to building reports in Power BI. There's the idea of organizing your data into a lake, which is where you can put CSV files, you can drop photos, you can drop historical data. The idea that you can store it there for long term, because you may not have questions today that need to be answered, but by having it in the lake, you can answer those questions in the future without having to rewrite your entire ETL script. So this is an important concept. The nice part with the one lake is you can create shortcuts to other systems. You might have data in your Azure Data Lake storage Gen 2 already today. You might have it in some like Google, Amazon S3, and soon to be some Google out there. So you don't have to, once you build your data set once, you can link to it, and you don't have to copy it multiple times, which can cause confusion. So some of the lingo, so everything works off of a capacity. When you sign up for Fabric, either if you're a shop that already has Power BI Premium, say P1, that includes what's called a F64 capacity, so 64 CPU or compute units. And so everything draws off of that. You create a workspace underneath a capacity. And so that workspace, when it's doing work, it uses those CPU units to do get all the work done. In the experience, you can change your persona in there and sort of get a focus view if you're a data engineer. And then everyone, like I said, who has a tenant, they already have a one lake, so one tenant to one lake. But you can have multiple capacities. So maybe the IR department needs their own CPU load and finance needs their own, or accounting. It can get expensive though, but there's flexibility to grow in the system. And here's a little bit about licensing. I am not a licensing expert. Please work with your licensing reseller. The idea though, to get started, like an F2 is roughly $9 a day, but this does get expensive quick. It can, an F64 can be $8,000 a month. These are all list prices. There are some licensings with the Power BI Pro and Premium. There's some things you have to pay attention to. So please work with your IT team and your software team as you decide to move into the Fabric ecosystem. And like Ben said, the other way to enter into Fabric is by using Power BI Premium, which includes F64 for Fabric. This is what the idea of a tenant and workspaces and capacity looks like. This is how you can imagine this is very expensive because each one of these capacities is money, but you can organize your data and organize your compute in ways that different teams can manage their own data. And by using shortcuts, you can link to that data once it's certified. So it's a nice way of organizing everything. Now, to get started, you can definitely have one tenant, one capacity, and one workspace. And there's nothing wrong with that. There are some guidance around creating multiple workspaces, but luckily you can share the one capacity without having additional costs. So with workspaces, you can organize them into domains. So in this example, finance, health, and education. The idea here is this term called data mesh, where you can decentralize some of your data. So maybe you have a data team over in finance, and they publish everything for everyone else to use. And you can manage that with domains. It's just a logical grouping of your data. For us, doing our trial, we're just using one domain. We don't need that separation. It's just, once again, you can grow into domains as you need to. So let's dive into the lakehouse. This is the piece of Fabric that you'll interact with the actual data itself. So this is an engine underneath Fabric, and this is what uses Spark notebooks and Delta Parquet files to interact with your data. The nice part here is you can choose to go the lakehouse route and ingest your data into the lake, but you can also just run standard select statements on top of it. You don't have to build anything. It automatically builds tables for you on the lakehouse. So in the lakehouse, you build shortcuts to other lakehouses, maybe to Amazon S3, so you can consolidate your data to make it easy. And the process is you load CSV files into the lakehouse, and then you convert them into tables or managed tables. And behind the scenes, Fabric is taking those CSV files and converting them into Delta Parquet files, which we'll get into more. And that's their columnar format, very much like the Vertipack engine in Power BI. And that's where all the magic sauce, and that's what allows you to do some of these reports and keep all your data organized. So Delta Parquet. So Fabric is built off of an open standard started by Databricks, which is great. So this is extendable to other systems as well. So you're not tying all your data into a proprietary system. It's all open source at this point. So it's nice how they built the system out. There's streaming support as well. So in case you have some streaming devices, all this can be pushed into the lake. Schema evolution is really promising. I haven't had a chance to play with it yet, but the days of adding a column to your raw table and then into the staging area before it goes to production required a lot of ETL access. Well, now when you use the lakehouse and use some of these files, the schema will automatically follow all the way through the different zones. And we'll talk about those zones in a little bit. So more on shortcuts. So shortcuts are a way to expose data to other workspaces. And there's some examples here, and that some of those workspaces or some of those data can also be external, like S3 and other Azure Data Lake storage if you happen to have any. But this is a great way to maybe organize your data by workspaces and then create shortcuts to another workspace where everything's sort of consolidated. And that's where you build your reports off of. So they've built some nice features with shortcuts to allow so you don't have to duplicate data. Mirroring. So this is in private preview right now. There haven't been a lot of blog posts written about it. So I'm hoping that they release something in the next few months. So this is something new they're looking at where if shortcuts don't work for you, there's a way where today you can use Cosmos or Azure SQL Database and a few others to replicate the data into the lake. You don't have to build any ETL jobs. It's point and click, and behind the scenes, it's using change data capture, and soon they'll be supporting SQL Server, Postgres, and a few others. So I'm looking forward to this. This way, you don't have to necessarily build a lot of ETL jobs. If you have some data sitting in a database, you can just turn this feature on, and the database is automatically updated in real time. It's really slick. So we'll hear more about this from Microsoft. Okay, so we talked about the lakehouse. That's built off of Parquet and Delta files and CSV files. The warehouse is your traditional SQL implementation of the data. So this is another engine underneath Fabric, is the best way to think about it. And this you use standard T-SQL objects. So you have views, you have functions, you have store procedures, tables, schemas. It's very similar to serverless pools, if any of you use Synapse. You can reference, if you're in the same workspace, you can have lakehouse data and you can have warehouse data, and you can reference them between each other, so you can run queries. You don't have to worry about copying anything. And warehouses support schemas and tables. So you can, as you build your data out in a warehouse, this is where you would do your dimension and fact tables, very similar to you have a raw area, maybe a raw schema, a staging schema, and then your production schema. And this is the warehouse supports that as well. So now the question is, how do you decide between a lakehouse and a warehouse? How do I decide which, where am I going to do my work kind of thing? And that's where Microsoft developed some of these slides to sort of help walk you through this. So the biggest thing is, where do you feel comfortable today managing data? Are you a Spark shop? Are you using notebooks today? Are you writing PySpark, Spark SQL, or are you doing everything through traditional T-SQL? So that's some of the early steps is determining where your comfort level is. And then there's some other reasons why you may want to go both or different ways. The nice part is you can use both of these. So you can do, if you have some data engineers that are comfortable with notebooks, they maybe can build out everything into the production area. And then on top of that, you can build views on top of the data, and that's all supported. So you can do a mix. Today, for us at Elon, because we use Azure Synapse, we already use notebooks. We use a lot of Spark SQL. And so if we were to go down this Fabric road, we would simply be able to take our notebooks and drop them into the Lakehouse and update a few pointers and start working again. So they have a nice path for those of you that are on serverless Synapse today. So there are two SQL endpoints in Fabric. So if you have data in the Lakehouse and you have data in the warehouse, you both can run T-SQL statements from it. It's really nice, and you can read data between the two. The tricky part is if you write data to the Lakehouse with your notebooks and Spark SQL, you cannot write data to the Lakehouse using T-SQL. It's notebooks to write on the Lakehouse side, and it's T-SQL to write on the warehouse side, but you can read across both. So that's also an important architecture difference as you're deciding how you're going to digest data into one lake, is you have to determine how it's going to end up there. On the warehouse side, as you pull data in, it's automatically creating tables for you behind the scenes, which is nice. You don't really have to worry about the Delta side of things as much as you do on the Lakehouse side. So it's nice. But so behind the scenes, everybody's got Delta files, Delta Parquet files. It's just that the data is represented a little bit differently depending on which architecture you go with. On the Lakehouse side, they have this medallion architecture, which also came from Databricks. And the idea here is you have a bronze, silver, and gold sort of area. And for you Power BI folks, you would simply point to the semantic model underneath the gold area. And the nice part about Fabric is it builds all the semantic models for you. As you drop data in, it automatically builds it. When we get to the demo phase, you'll see that I didn't have to build any semantic models. They're already in the system. So I'll show you that in a little bit. But this is an architecture of in the Lakehouse getting data through the different systems. So bronze might be where all the data lands. Silver is where you get the data prepped using notebooks and Spark jobs to get it ready to drop and merge into the gold area. And that's how this works, at least on the Lakehouse side. So now Data Factory. So Azure Data Factory has been around for a number of years. It's like a cloud version of an ETL tool. They've integrated it in with Fabric. The nice part about Data Factory is it's the orchestration. You can, and I'll show this in the demo, you can do some jobs in the Lakehouse, do some data flows, which is Power Query, and you can move data throughout as you're developing your ETL system. And yeah, so that's Data Factory, and I'll show you that a little bit more. And then now Power BI. So this is one of the biggest improvements is those of you that are familiar with loading data into Power BI and doing a refresh, there's two models today to do that. There's the import and there's direct query. If your data happens to be close enough to your Power BI system, direct query could be an option, but it's also could be very slow. And then import, you have to deal with the data refreshes. So what Microsoft came up with is this notion of direct lake. And it's the best of both worlds. It uses some caching, it uses better performance, and you're pretty much hitting the live, you are hitting live data. Data refreshes automatically happen behind the scenes that happen in the lake. But you don't have to worry about doing data refreshes at all. There's some intelligent caching going on. So there's lots of topics on Direct Lake. You'll definitely want to test this out. Depending on their performance, I've seen varying degrees of success when you have low like F2 model versus F64. So just something to dive into. And also be mindful that in direct lake mode, you could fall back to direct query mode depending on the circumstances. So lots of testing needs to be done with your data model to figure out if direct lake is something that works for you. You can always fall back to import mode if you need to. This is just something you don't care about refreshes. So other integrations. So also within the ecosystem, since we're in the Microsoft ecosystem, for those of you that have anything to do with Dataverse, you can actually link Dataverse into the lake. What's nice about this is the data that's in Dataverse will end up over in the one lake as Delta files. And so from there, you can create tables and you can merge them into your semantic models and use them in your reports. We're not a Dataverse big shop. We do have some Power Apps and that kind of thing, but this is something we're going to be looking into as well in the coming months. Data Activator sounds really nice. You can set alerts within Power BI on your data. It's point and click. You can do emails, Teams notifications, Power Automate, all third-party apps, whatever you want to do. Lots of opportunity here to set up alerts on your Power BI data, which sounds interesting. And then semantic link. This is in preview. This is primarily for the data engineers who are using Spark notebooks, but today what they can do is they can reach into the Power BI model, they can evaluate expressions, they can DAC expressions, they can evaluate measures, and they can see all this data within the notebooks. So that any kind of business logic, like maybe GPA or credit hours, whatever you have in your Power BI model, it can be referenced inside of the data science area, the notebooks. So it sounds very cool. We're not a big data engineering shop here, but we do some stuff with notebooks, but I don't know if this is the best fit for us, maybe not for you, but it shows that they're trying to get all these systems talking to one another. One of the last other pieces is getting data into the lake. They actually have an add-on for File Explorer. So much like you have your OneDrive, you'll have your OneLake, and you can drag and drop files into the lake as you build out your different workspaces and your lake houses and warehouses. And then a recent improvement in the last few months, you can drop Excel files into OneLake, and you can actually edit the Excel files now directly in the OneLake. It wasn't the case early on. So you could, in theory, set up a folder for the accounting department to update some spreadsheet files and have those automatically update within the lake. So it sounds interesting. It's something to consider as you're architecting the solution. Okay, Fabric demo time. So lots of things to think about. And we'll go through this. Yeah, we're good on time. Okay, so this is a Fabric. So it's very much like Power BI today that you might see. And you have all your workspaces and that you're used to seeing. And I've built a workspace for today. And this workspace was built using the capacity. I'm in the preview mode. You can see up here, we have a trial. So we have 59 days left in our trial. So I went out and built some stuff. So this is the main interface. You can see here, you can filter on different objects that you have. You still have your standard, your Power BI reports, your semantic models, but you'll notice you have all these new artifacts in your workspace now that you're not used to seeing. And these are all the Fabric elements that I created. So you can see here, I have a notebook out here. I have a lake house. I have a lake house down here, a warehouse. I have a data flow. I have a pipeline, and we'll sort of dive into each one of these just so you get an idea how this works. So let's first dive into the lake house. And this was, the lake house is what I started with were some files. And let me switch this around. We switch. This is the SQL endpoint. If I switch back to the lake house, you'll see, so I started with CSV files, and I right-clicked and I loaded this to a new table. And this is what turns it into a managed table, and it automatically created this table for me. So this is a SQL table that I can query, but behind the scenes, it's just files. So here's the actual Parquet file, and then what Delta gives you is this log. And this is what makes it, this is what turns it into a database. It gives you time stamping. You're able to go back in time, all kinds of neat things. So this is what the lake house looks like. And right here, if we dive into this a little bit, you look at these little icons here. You can see I set up a shortcut, and this reporting category is a shortcut to a different workspace that has data in it. And that's the power of shortcuts. So I have this data in a separate workspace, but I joined it into this workspace. So ultimately we can build a Power BI model on top of it. So that's how shortcuts work. And it's a real easy process to get those set up. So that's the lake house. And then the warehouse, little different experience. This is where you have different tables and queries out here. And I haven't built any yet, but you'll notice I can, if I switch, and it's not showing it, my lake house should appear. And this is what happens when you do live demos. I don't see it. You're able to query your lake house from within the student warehouse. So I'll have to figure out why that's not showing. But that's your warehouse experience. Getting data into the lake is, you have a couple different options. You can use notebooks, like I said. You can build out Spark. This is Spark SQL, for example. In this case, we're doing some data frames. For those of you that are familiar with data frames, you can do all kinds of stuff, and you can write, once you have your data frame all set up, you can write it back to a table. So that's where notebooks come in. In addition to notebooks, what they've done is they've taken what used to be Power Query and they've improved it, and it's now called Data Flows Gen 2. And for those of you that are in Power BI every day, this should look familiar. This is Power Query. You'll notice up here, it does say Power Query. And from here, what you can do is I imported a CSV file, did some very basic information, and then I can publish this out as a table. So you don't have to use notebooks, you don't have to use T-SQL, you can use Power Query to do your ETL operations just like you are doing today as well. And then once you get your data in, then you can use pipelines, or this is Azure Data Factory, and you can actually schedule, you can build jobs. So in this case, we're calling a data flow that we built. And then once it's successful, it's calling a notebook that we built. And this is how you'd build your orchestration for your load each night, depending on what kind of ETL operations you have to do. So that's where pipelines come in. You can schedule these, run these at night. We use these in the Synapse world to load our data each night as well. And those are pipelines. So we talked about data flows, warehouse, pipelines. And then one thing I wanted to show you was you can build queries. So if we come in here, they have this new thing called a visual query editor, which, see, it's loading. So this is what it looks like. So if you remember back in the days of Microsoft Access, when you built a query, this is the same idea. You can drag tables over here and you can do different operations in here. Notice you can reduce some rows, you can sort, you can transform. So if you're not comfortable in T-SQL, you can do all of this in your visual query. You can actually save the results as a table. So it will go back in your warehouse as a table. You can download it to Excel. And the really cool part is you can visualize the results. And within here, this is building a Power BI. This is on Power BI Online. So I'm on a Mac. I don't have Power BI Desktop installed, but you can see here, I can come in here and I can click on these different items and I can load them into a table and I can save this as a report. And so you can build this out. And so if we come back out to the workspace, you'll notice here's my Power BI report I built earlier. And if I click on it, here's my report. And And so I'm doing this all within Fabric. I haven't left Fabric yet, which is really nice. Part of this was the semantic models I mentioned. So for the Power BI developers out there, you would actually load Power BI and you would point to these semantic models. So they're already here for you. As you add tables to the lakehouse or to the warehouse, these semantic models automatically update for you. It keeps it all there. You can still go in and make your changes that you need to, but it keeps everything organized for you. So as a very quick demo on Lakehouse, and then let me see this. So demo, okay, so resources. You'll want to get with your Azure admin, and you can turn on a Fabric trial. You follow this link, read the instructions, you get 60 days. What I would recommend though is don't open this up to the entire organization. Have your admin team create a security group. We have 4 people in this group right now, and we're the only ones who can create Fabric items. You don't want this to become the wild, wild west in your organization. Approach this as a new system and do some testing, that kind of stuff, while you have your trial before you spend any money. But just lock it down so it doesn't get too crazy out there. I've linked to the documentation. The documentation is excellent. Microsoft has really stepped up their game in the last few years. Recently, they did these Learn Live events through YouTube for a specific data platform certification, but it's all on Fabric. And so there's 8 or 9 sessions, and a lot of the topics I covered today are all covered in great length in each one of these videos. So these are recorded. There are going to be some new ones coming out as well, but great resource. And if you're really interested in Fabric, there's a Fabric conference coming up in Las Vegas about a month away that Microsoft's putting on. And there's going to be a ton of Power BI and Microsoft and Fabric community partners out there. Some great sessions. So if you're interested in that, definitely attend that. For those of you that aren't already listening to or heard of Explicit Measured podcast or YouTube, these guys are great. They're all consultants, and they've come from the Power BI world and then are now sort of been thrown into Fabric just because of the way Microsoft released it. It's a great show. They do it twice a week, and I've learned so much listening to this on the commute into work. So highly recommend that. And of course, the guys in the Cube, can't go wrong with them, the original sort of Power BI guys on YouTube. They do live shows on Saturday morning that you can ask questions and that kind of stuff. And since this is software as a service, you're at the mercy of cloud hosted software. And so I have a link in here for the Azure Fabric status, so you can see the status of Fabric. Just like anything else with a cloud provider, things can go wrong. There can be issues that data center software issues. And so you always want to stay attuned to anything going on in the Fabric world if you are running into issues. So with that, I know that was a very quick introduction to Fabric, but are there any questions that I can help answer?
Yeah, I'd ask people, put your questions in the chat, and I'll be happy to put those to Doug. I'll go ahead and say, Doug, thank you for walking us through all of this. Very technical, a lot of stuff going on,
Yeah.
and you can see like it's there are a lot of things that we maybe take for granted when we're maybe working in an IR shop and we're building dashboards, about all the work that goes into the data engineering side of things to get data from multiple sources at your college or university, to clean and transform them, to optimize them for reporting and analytics, staging them, prepping them, putting them into a warehouse. One of the big takeaways that you should probably have as data professionals is that Fabric unifies a lot of that function on one platform. All of the data engineering and warehousing, even some of the data science stuff, using those notebooks and everything. There's so much in Fabric. Doug, I'll ask one question from myself, and then
Mhm.
I'll go to the questions from the audience. In your opinion, as a data architect, what do you think are the features that Power BI developers that are in this group today should be most excited about with Fabric?
Definitely direct lake, so that now you'll have access to real-time data. So behind the scenes, depending on who's loading data into your into the one lake, you'll see those results instantaneously. You don't have to do any refreshes. So I think that's one of the biggest things. And I think the ease at which you can get data into the lake. This notion of being able to use Power Query to release it to your partners, business partners in different departments, and allow them to push data into the lake as well, so you don't have to build those ETL jobs, are just two of the things that come top of mind.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
We've got a question from Cesar about domains, and this is interesting to me because I've been reading up on the whole data mesh architecture
Mhm.
and trying to figure out how Davidson could potentially introduce a decentralized data mesh. So Cesar's question is, how could we use domains to organize different groups in higher education specific scenarios? And you might have thought about this already. Some of the things that come to mind for me are having like a financial aid domain, a registrar domain, a finance domain that allows you to use these features to sort of determine, who has certain levels of permissions to the workspaces in these domains. But maybe there's something else I'm missing that you've thought of with how domains can help in higher ed scenarios.
Yeah, I think it goes to data stewards. So if you're a data governance shop and you're trying to push out ownership of the data, these data stewards can now sort of own their own domain and do all the data validation and secure it and certify it. And that way the rest of the campus can use those data points. So that's one of the big sales things with domains.
Yeah, and I think that that's kind of where the domains feature meets up with shortcuts as well, because one of the key concepts
Yeah.
behind data mesh is that your team, if you're in the registrar office, your data is a product that you
Mhm.
create and you manage and you share with other departments at the college. And so by creating a registrar domain, it establishes your ownership over the Power BI workspaces and other things within that domain. And then that shortcuts feature is a really cool thing that allows you to push data to the different consumers of your of your data product. So if you
Yeah.
have a subset of student data that you need to push out to financial aid or to institutional research and effectiveness, the shortcuts feature inside of Fabric allows you to do that, pushing data from your domain to a totally different domain so that they can build stuff
Yep.
using data that you have approved and managed.
Agree. Yes.
So Jeff has a question. How does Fabric handle Python libraries within notebooks? Can you install them to the tenant so that they are available globally for all of your data analysts?
Yes. So as far as I remember, you would load those Python extensions inside of each cell. So from what I remember, so you wouldn't necessarily load it globally. You would just have to use them in each cell that you're taking advantage of those libraries, but they're all supported. It's a very extensive list of Python extensions. And I'm not a Python person, but that's just from some of the videos I've seen. And if you go back and watch those Learn Live sessions, especially when they talk about loading a lake house, they dive into some of the warehouses and they touch on that topic a little bit as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can definitely count on seeing support for pandas,
Yep, pandas.
NumPy,
Yep,
Matplotlib, like, all the really big ones that you
yeah,
typically see.
yeah, definitely pandas. I saw videos on pandas. So
Yeah. What other questions do we have out there? I don't see any in the chat window. Does anyone have anything else?
I don't really have a question, but I just want to make a comment. Doug, you did a great job walking through a very extensive right product of
thanks.
Fabric. I
Yeah,
mean, I think the one thing that excites me the most is, what Pete was just talking about with having this data mesh concept with at Miami, we're very decentralized, right? So we always have the issue of, okay, how are we going to integrate all of these things? So this makes it, having Fabric would make it so much easier. We're going to have the governance around it, but being able to just have folks, push data to specific, lake house or whatever, and then we don't have performance degradation, right, with the Parquet files. That is, like, I get very excited thinking about that. We
Yeah.
have to get to the planning phase here, but it makes a dream become a reality having this technology.
Yeah, it's great to hear. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Um, I had another thought on that, and I think it just escaped my mind because I just got to Amon's question in the chat. So Amon was wondering, he's heard people say that data flows Gen 2 are not as solid as other pipeline items. Do you have any related insight on these components? I'll go ahead and say I'm not sure. I haven't heard anything. I think data flows Gen 2, they look really appealing because you can actually choose the destination for your data flow. You can set a data destination and funnel your data from the data flow into a lake house or warehouse. Doug, do you have any thoughts on Amon's question?
I haven't heard anything. The one thing that we're lucky because we went through the Synapse implementation is we have a metadata driven implementation. So what I mean by that is we didn't go through and build ETL jobs and ETL pipelines for every single table. We have this database and it's loaded with metadata and it says, this batch, do this job, this job, this job, and this job. And it's a bunch of SQL statements. And we pass those SQL statements into a notebook. And so we built the ETL once. And then when we want to add a new table into the ecosystem, we simply add a few rows to the metadata table. And to me, that's the real power. We don't want to be in the business of writing data flows for every single data movement. We need to think higher level. Now, data flows are great for the business partners, someone in registrar's office who doesn't know exactly how that works, but they can perfect implementation of data flows. But for the architecture standpoint, for the larger data sets, metadata driven, I think, is the real power. And there's some great blog posts on that as well. So something to consider when you're implementing this.
I think that touches on Amon's follow-up, which is he said, I think I heard some people use them to move data, but other things to transform data. So I think, data flows are a very good transformation tool. However, generally, the rule of thumb is that you want to try and do your data transformations as close to the data source as you can and try to avoid doing it farther downstream. That's not to say that data flows aren't a very good ETL tool. They certainly are. But one of the things you're going to run into is, especially when you're dealing with pulling in file data, you're not able to leverage query folding with data flows as much when you're working with file data, because the way query folding works is it uses the compute and memory of the data source, like the SQL Server or Oracle database, to apply those transformations before the data actually leaves that server. So you're using those resources, you're using that additional firepower to do transformations. And that's Power Query just kind of, taking advantage of those additional resources. But you can't do that with file data sources. So inevitably, if you're pulling data from an Excel file or a CSV file, you can't take advantage of query folding, which means the transformations that you're applying, especially on very large data sets, are going to be slower. And that's one of the reasons why, I think generally most data architects will tell you that if you're working in a centralized data warehouse environment, we generally want to try and do those transformations closer to the data source to take advantage of those things and not have to rely as much on data flows. The other part I'll say is that Data Factory is more of the orchestration part of this, where you can do scheduling and you can tell Data Factory to invoke a data flow to move data from point to point. It's one of the really interesting things for me has been trying to wrap my head around the new sort of interplay between Data Factory and data flows inside of this whole Fabric thing. But then again, I love data engineering topics. So it really appeals to me as a data engineering.
Yes, agree.
Zahir has a question. How do we do ELT over ETL to utilize potential of Fabric as storage?
Yeah, so think, yeah, so in the traditional data warehouse world with OLAP cubes, it was ETL. It was extract everything as quick as you could from the source system, transform it in a staging area, and then load it into your cube. What the lake scenario gives you is sort of a flip on that is ELT, where you extract everything, load it into the lake. And that way you load everything that you can, because disk is cheap these days. And that way, then you can transform it into what you need for reporting purposes. And like I said during the presentation, is by doing ELT, you can answer a question in the future. The data is sitting in the lake, and so you just simply introduce it into your lake house, and you can answer that questions within hours instead of days and months, because you have to rework your ETL solution. So ELT has some advantages, and the lake is what exposes the ELT.
Yeah, I think the lake house area is where you'll see a lot of data scientists applying their skill sets, because they can go in and manipulate that raw data and do their work. Whereas, further downstream, when you're getting to the semantic models and the Power BI reports, that's where your data analysts and your consumers will be.
Yep.
We've still got a few more minutes if there are any other questions, but if not, we could always wrap up a little early. Anyone else have any more questions for Doug? Going once, going twice. Well, his email is on the slide right there if you have any specific questions for him. Doug, thank you so much for walking us through Fabric. Really excited if there are other institutions that are out there planning on moving up to Fabric, come join the herd. We're going there. It's going to be a lot of fun. Take advantage of some of these new technologies. Last word I'll say before we close for the day, look out for a message from me, hopefully in the next 30 to 45 minutes. Doug's going to send me his slide deck. I'm going to send out a message that has some of the links that he included, links to a bunch of other stuff for you all. Please, 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 if you have an idea that you want to present on, or that you think one of us should present on, if you just have a general idea of something that you're curious about, please reach out to me. You can go on meetup.com and contact me that way, or you can send me an email. I'm going to put my email in the chat window for those of you who don't already have it. But yeah, please reach out. Next month's meeting is already set. We've got VJ from TrueBiz coming, but I'm looking to set up programming for April and May and beyond. So reach out to me. I think one of the next topics we'll probably do is going to be how to migrate from SQL Server reporting services to Power BI. That's a topic that's been talked about before. So if you are currently interested in SSRS to Power BI, we might do that. Also, if any of you are Tableau developers, maybe you want to do a Tableau to Power BI comparison for those of you who are out there who have also been in that boat. So, the world is your oyster. Send us a topic. With that said, thanks again to Doug. Thanks to all of you for showing up. Really appreciate all of you coming here and being engaged. And we will see you at the next meeting.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.